All right, in this video, I want to present some research that I did. I think a couple years ago, might have been like 2 years ago, and it was looking at the question of, do guns cause violence? Like, does the existence of guns increase the overall number of instances of violence? And I'll get into the research here. But the short answer is that it doesn't increase the amount of violence, but it increases the amount of violence that turn into dead bodies. Let's get into this then. So all of this data is from the FBI's Crime Finder or Data Finder, Data Explorer. I can't remember exactly what it's called. And the data is from 2001. So the new FBI's crime report stuff has a bunch of different statistics on it, with very specific details. And one of those details is that you can see the weapon used in certain violent crimes. So you can see an aggravated assault, and you can see what percentage of aggravated assaults or how many aggravated assaults there were with a gun or with a blunt object, or other things like even poison. And you can see the same thing for homicides. You can see the weapon used in the homicide. So if you look at Round Rock, Texas here, there were 3 homicides and all of them had a gun. And there were 105 aggravated assaults, and 56 used a gun, 26 used a knife, and 8 used hands, and etc. So there were, I guess, 82 cities that I used data from. So I found data for all of the cities above 100,000 in population, but not all of the cities had adequate data or sufficient data. So this list here, you can see there was 115 cities that did not have good enough data to use, and the determinant of whether data was good enough or not was right here, this unstated percentage. So for the aggravated assaults and also and homicides too, some are unstated. They don't state the weapon. It wasn't included in the data. So for all cities that had an unstated percentage larger than 20%, I did not use their data. You can see the biggest city here, Columbus, Georgia, where just over half of their aggravated assaults did not report a weapon, or had an unstated weapon. And unstated is different than no weapon. No weapon is hands. It's explicitly stated as that being the weapon. So the first thing I looked at was trying to find the correlation. So we're using like the Pearson correlation coefficient, basically the standard for measuring correlation that in everything. I was trying to correlate all of these different statistics with homicides. So I was correlating the shootings per 100,000 residents with the homicide rate, the shooting rate and the homicide rate, the knifing rate and the homicide rate, the clubbing rate, which clubbing means like a blunt object, so like a hammer or a baseball bat, and the fists, in homicide, all aggravated assaults and homicides, and all weapons, so that excludes beatings, that's just shootings, knifings, clubbings, and other weapons as well. And so I did stratify the data by percentage. This percentage here is the percentage of aggravated assaults that are unstated by their weapon. So we have 0 to 9.9, 10 to 14.9, and 15 to 9.9. And then, of course, we have the totals. So of all the cities, right? So these are these numbers down here that I'm highlighting right now. That's the correlations. the correlation coefficients. And so basically the higher that number is, the more the two statistics correlate with each other. Okay, so for example, we can see that and this goes from -1 to +1. So if it's negative, it means there's an inverse correlation. As we can see, aggravated assault, like severe beatings, correlate with homicide only 0.22. Blunt objects 0.3. Knifing 0.4. Shooting 0.8. All right. Here's where it gets interesting, though. See, the number of shootings correlates much more strongly with the homicide rate than all assaults, than all aggravated assaults. In fact, including all weapons. So all aggravated assaults, correlation is 0.6. For all weapons, it's 0.67. For shootings, it's 0.8. So basically what this says is that gun violence is actually more correlated with homicides than violence in general. Let me restate that. Violence in general, all forms of violence, correlate less with homicides than just gun violence, than just shootings. So the way I came up with visualizing this, like in a graph type of way, was I made what I call, I guess, data ribbons or color ribbons or whatever. I don't know if this is like something that people have used before. I've never seen it before. I've used it in the past as well for other research that I've done about crime statistics, and I'll probably make a video on that eventually, because this is like pretty old research of mine. But the darker the color, the darker the red, the higher the rate. And so on the most left here, we can see we're looking at guns and homicides. So how do these, like, how do I make these? So basically, this is how they look. So you have a city, and then you have its homicide rate, its shooting rate. You know, its homicide rate, its shooting rate, and they're color coded gradiently. And they're sorted by. They're always sorted by homicide. So you can see they're always sorted by homicide. And then it's matching. So how close do these colors match, right? Like how close does each cell match with the neighboring cell in color? So that's like how these are made. And then when we look at them from a distance, you can just see, like, look at the aggravated assaults with no weapons. Like there's no, you can see the correlation there. It's just not existent. Again, you can see with knives as well. It's like, okay, the knives looks better than the no weapons, but compared to the guns, I mean, the guns is like clearly the best match, right? So that's just a way to visualize that type of stuff. So another thing I calculated was what I call the kill percentage. And so basically what this does is it looks at the total amount of, so it looks at the total amount of homicides and aggravated assaults by a certain weapon, and then it adds them together, and then it finds the percentage, like what percentage of that total aggravated assaults plus homicides are homicides. So that's the kill percentage. So 7.7, basically 7.1% of aggravated assaults with a gun end up in homicides, whereas for knifings that's 1.2, for blunt objects 0.5, and for hands 0.49. Now keep in mind with hands, the hands is not a great statistic. I put it there just because it was there, but I would kind of disregard it. I wouldn't pay much attention to it, because the thing about the definition of aggravated assault, like it's not as objective as you would think. It's subjective. So if a weapon is used, it's automatically an aggravated assault. But where it gets subjective is if it's just hands, right? So it's like, is an assault a simple assault, or an aggravated assault. Depends on how severe the beating was. And that's kind of up to the officer who reports it. So these beatings by hand are severe beatings by hand. It's not all beatings by hand. So this kill percentage doesn't include like a punch to the chest or something, because that wouldn't be considered aggravated assault. It would include something like getting stomped, getting stomped on the ribs or whatever. It would include getting ground pounded. It would probably include getting punched in the face a few times really hard. But again, it doesn't include all assaults. It's just the severe hand assaults. To demonstrate this point, some cities have very high percentages of their aggravated assaults as coming from hands, from no weapons, whereas others have very low rates, and like very high right there, Provo, very low at Newark. And I imagine that's just because of different ways that police departments classify which hand assaults, no weapon assaults, are aggravated and which aren't. So also keep in mind, this is also okay, so this is kind of a side note here, but a lot of crime data is really bad and presented in ways that aren't very good. And this is a great example, aggravated assaults, because you can just see right here, most your aggravated assault rate is going to be so influenced by what type of beatings by hand they include as aggravated assaults. Which is why I prefer this one, all weapon. Weapon aggravated assaults. That I think is a better statistic. That's more telling. It's less subjective. I mean, it's not really subjective at all, I guess. It's if you have a weapon, it's a weapon. It's aggravated assault. Whereas hands, it's subjective. Okay, so that's kind of just a side point there. So these would be very different from hospital numbers, because an aggravated assault includes attempts. So if someone points a gun at you, that can be considered an aggravated assault. If someone shoots and misses you, that's an aggravated assault. If someone throws a knife at you and misses, that's an aggravated assault with a knife. Attempts are also considered to be of the crime. Attempts are the crime, right? And a good way to explain why this is the case, why are attempts the same, counted as the same? Because an attempt can be successful or failure depending on who the victim was, right? If you try to strong arm somebody who, is, a 16-year-old teenager, you strong arm rob them, right? You're like a 26-year-old man. Okay, you're gonna probably have success. Now you try to strong arm somebody who maybe is a little smaller than you, but you don't know that, They're actually a pretty fucking good boxer. So they kick the shit out of you. They tried to rob you, but you tried to rob them, but they beat the fuck out of you. That's just trying to illustrate the point of why attempts are also considered the same as actual completed ones, because again, they tell you about the activity going on. And again, if you were in the shoes of that boxer who was getting strong arm robbed, you might get robbed, but he didn't, because he was able to fight back. So who the victim is oftentimes will determine if the crime is successful or not. But the statistics are not measuring victim capacity or victim ability. Not victim ability, the victim's ability. They're measuring criminal activity. And the criminal activity whether successful or an attempt, is criminal activity. This next thing I looked at, this next statistic that I calculated, was the gun usage percentage versus the homicide rate. So basically, I classified cities into cohorts. So, and averaged them out. So every city whose aggravated assaults were, for example, between 10 and 19.9% with a gun, right? Their average aggravated assault rate was 356.6. For cities that had a gun usage percentage, and again, gun usage percentage is referring to what percentage of aggravated assaults are committed with a gun. So this cohort of cities, 20 to 29.9%, averages to 348.3, right? For aggravated assault. So you can see that apart from the 0 to 9.9 percentage, all of the other cohorts have basically the same aggravated assault rates. But where we see the trend, the correlation, is the average homicide rate. So cities that have a gun usage percentage over 50%, on average, homicide rate of 18.9 per 100,000 people. And then obviously we see, like, okay, the 40 to 49 is lower than the 30 to 39, but that's because they have a higher aggravated assault rate. So I made the assault to homicide ratio basically what it's saying for this number. So for example, for every 19 aggravated assaults in these 50 plus percentage cities, you get a homicide. For the 40 to 49.9%, for every 30 aggravated assaults, you get a homicide. For every 31 aggravated assaults, you get a homicide. Then 42, then 88, then 136. Yeah, I mean, then I just did some correlation coefficients again. The weapon usage percentage versus homicide correlation. So the tendency to use guns has a 0.57 correlation, whereas all of the other ones have a negative correlation. So I think that's basically it. I just wanted to present this data. Yeah, I mean, if you guys have questions about things I didn't talk about, because I haven't really looked at this data in a long time. Actually, I tried to make a post with it on Data is Beautiful on Reddit, but that shit didn't just... I made a long write-up with sources and everything, and for some reason the mods didn't approve it or some shit. I probably didn't cover everything that I should have, but I also didn't want the video to be too long. So hopefully this is an interesting video. I mean, I think it brings proper nuance to this discussion, because on one end, there's people who argue that and are very, staunch in saying that, guns cause violence. You know what I'm saying? If we get rid of guns, we're going to get rid of violence. And it's like, well, that's not really true, as we saw with the statistics, right? Like, regardless of how, like, again, cities that had a gun usage percent of 10 to 19.9% had the same aggravated assault rate as cities that had a gun usage percentage of 50%, right? So it doesn't get rid of the violence, but clearly it will lower the severity of the violence. You know what I'm saying? And so on the other hand, there are some people who argue the opposite. They say, well, guns don't cause violence. Guns are inanimate objects, they'll say. But the thing is that they might not cause the violence, but they sure as hell make it worse. I mean, just think of any scenario where two neighbors get into an argument, maybe it gets physical. If they just throw hands, no one's dying. But one of them might get a gun and shoot the other one out of a fit of rage, you know, and then right when he shoots him, it's like, fuck, like he realizes, oh shit, I fucked up. You know, he instantly, boom. And you know, he would have had that same effect if he just went and fucking punched him in the jaw. He would have done that shit, maybe done a few punches and then been like, okay, hold on, you know? But a couple punches, that's not going to kill somebody in most contexts. A fucking gunshot to the chest, you know? A high chance of killing somebody. Oh, anyway, I'm not here to make an argument pro-gun, anti-gun. This is just the data. This is what this data says, okay? It's from the FBI data, my calculations. Like, we just have to be honest about the pros and cons of things. And so, clearly, you know, there is obviously a con here. You know, the con is pretty apparent. The guns turn what would otherwise be non-lethal interactions into lethal interactions. But they aren't responsible for the violence in the first place. Getting rid of guns isn't going to get rid of robberies. It's not going to get rid of people being jumped. It's not going to get rid of knife violence. It's not going to get rid of violence, you know? But it probably will reduce the amount of violence that ends up with a dead body.